this ironed out earlier, but clearly I didn't. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about chasing a desert apparition, the LeConte's thrasher. Little picture there in the corner. What's the matter here? It's not. There we go. Considered by many observers to be fairly shy and very retiring because it's hard to find, even get a glimpse of. And once you do, it tends to be disappearing rather quickly. So there it went. If you didn't see it, you missed it. So you go out with your buddies and you can look around, and sometimes you get lucky and oh, there's the thrasher in the middle. But sometimes it just runs right behind a little tiny bush and just vanishes right in front of your eyes. So most birders end up seeing the south end of a north running LeConte's thrasher. They spend a lot of their time, a great proportion of their time, on the ground. They don't do a lot of flying. I mean, they will fly, but not a lot. Member of the mimid family, a good songster. So it's only found in the hottest and driest portions of the American Southwest and northwestern Mexico. And I mean hottest and driest. A little over 2 ounces in weight, and it rarely, if ever, drinks water. In fact, most water that they do see is in the middle of the winter when it's nice to have, but nothing compared to the hot summer days. It requires rainfall, excuse me, relatively flat terrain and scattered shrubs with low to 5, maybe lower than 5 feet in most cases. Deep sandy soils are usually very good. And then they prefer the choyas and salt bushes for their nesting. This is the hottest place in the entire world. This is the floor of Death Valley in the far distance there, that white pan there of soda. The vegetation here is not dependent on the rainfall that occurs here, which is only about 2.5 inches per year, and that's not even really, it's usually zero, and then they get 5 inches every other year or two. The moisture for these plants comes from the mountains behind the camera, and these roots of these plants go down 20, 30 or more feet to tap into that little teeny bit of moisture that's down there. But the thrashers spend all day out here in the hot summer when the record is 135 and point something or other Fahrenheit. That's a pretty warm temperature. I don't know if any of you have ever been to even into 125. That's a pretty warm temperature. They do like sand dunes, especially with nice vegetation like this. This is what the habitat in northwestern Arizona, very similar to what's in southwestern Arizona, just scattered mesquite and creosote bush and similar shrubs. Not a lot of vegetation. They are limited by precipitation. Maximum is about 8 inches, and maximum snowfall per year can only be about 6 inches. They're not real good at digging through the snow. I hope we don't get too much snow tonight or tomorrow. I don't think we're going to get. At any rate, the maximum elevation that they're found at is just under 6,000 feet, and that's actually in the northern part of their range up near Death Valley. The southern Arizona gets summer monsoons in July and August that sweep up from Mexico and sort of peter out by the time, most of the time, when they get to Phoenix. So between Tucson and Phoenix, if you know your geography, there's a transition between the big microfilled desert, which you see in the background there, the heavy vegetation for a desert, and then the lower, closer vegetation, which is caused really by the soil there, not by the rain. And the LeConte's will be in the foreground if they're found at all in this area. This is the southeasternmost point in their distribution within the United States. And even there, they're fairly uncommon. You've got to really look hard. You go the opposite direction in the northwest corner of California, well, northwest corner of their range in central what am I directed there? Central eastern California. This is the Owens Valley near Bishop. And this is nothing but salt bush and very excellent habitat for them. Maybe a cold winter, but there's no snow or hardly any snow, and they can find plenty of insects burrowing in the ground underneath these bushes. This is more typical vegetation. This is right in the middle of the Mojave Desert in the center part, and you see the wide variety of vegetation. Thrashers are found in that. The population of Los Angeles has had to mushroom out into the desert, and some of the locals have got these nice little ranchettes on the north side of the mountains north of Los Angeles, and they actually have LeConte thrashers nesting right next to their houses in these choyas. And if they throw out mealworms, they will get them throughout. LeConte thrashers are not at all shy about coming right up to your house. This is the historic range of the thrasher. And by historic, the San Joaquin Valley now is really restricted. It's down to just a few little spots anywhere in the San Joaquin Carrizo Plain area. The study area is you see the bright red star. But if you look at if you see this little hole there, that's the Salton Sea in southeastern California. And that area that we were looking at in Tucson and southern Arizona was just right in this corner over here. There's a separate population on the west coast of Baja. But what's now interesting, just after this monograph was published, literally about 60 days after it was published, if you look up at the top, there's a little black dot there, and that's really not even to scale. It's about 100 miles north of the green area. A new population was discovered in the bottom of a very deep valley, and it's a very small population, probably 20, 30 pairs max. Totally isolated from all other thrashers. It's really got me curious. What the heck are they doing there? But it doesn't snow. It's so low that the snow does not accumulate in the bottom of this valley. It's 4,000 feet. So the thrasher study was done from 68 to 71 near the little town of Maricopa, California. It was this main tract was approximately 1,800 acres, 3 square miles. In that area, we had 35 or 40 pairs, which produced approximately 130 young each year. And all the nestlings and most of the fledglings were banded, as well as about 75% of the breeding adults were color marked, so I could identify them individually. So I knew Mabel from George, from Pete, etc. This is actually what started the project. While I was still on active duty in the Navy, I stopped one free weekend and caught this pair of thrashers along with their fledglings, which were just running around on the ground. And this male, I went back a year later, he was still there. Gee whiz, how'd that happen? And so it was his mate. And so the two of them bred together for the next 4 years. Unfortunately, the female got hit by a car, and a bird watcher flushed it across the road. Minor detail there. But the male was still alive at the end of the study. So he was been gone through 5 breeding seasons that I know of. So this bird right here is the what started the whole project. This is the tract that I looked at, approximately 1,800 acres, the little town of Maricopa in the upper right corner, northeast corner. But what I want you to look at is zoom in a little bit. See all these roads. We got all these little. I mean, they were certainly not paved. They're just gravel surface roads, and just all over the place. I could drive to probably 70, 80% of the nests that I found and look right down at the nest or the bush. This area right here I excluded from the acreage because it was completely cleared of all vegetation by some mining interests a decade or two before I started the study. So I just left it out of there. I'll refer to the road grader later. This referred to a little shed that the birds nested in once or twice. And this sea point, we'll look at it a little bit later also. Here's the school at Maricopa. I took very few pictures, actually, of my color-banded birds. So here's a male sitting on one of the few fence posts that were out in the middle of the track. This is the west side of the track, just showing the vegetation, the Tembler range of the mountains to the behind in the background. The birds do not like that rough terrain up there. So they just went up to the very bottom of those hills and pretty much stopped. The birds build a typical sticky bird nest that if you've seen a brown thrasher nest, a cardinal nest, a catbird nest, a mockingbird nest, you've seen basically any other thrasher nest except for this species. This species adds a second inner layer to the lining, and it's very unusual. I mean, you don't even see it most other birds, at least that I know of, in the United States. It's a soft, usually soft material. They use plant leaves and flowers and other materials. I don't know where they gathered them all. And it's a fairly thick but soft layer. This particular nest, oh, it would remind you, if you've been around a little while like me, of mattress ticking, that sort of dull brown, tan material if you come into it, dig into an old mattress. Well, that's actually what this nest was made with. It was right next to the local town dump, and somebody had left a mattress out on the desert floor, and the birds were removing the. So the nesting takes place from late January through to mid-June, and that's stretching it. They lay 2 to 5 eggs, a typical clutch. At Maricopa, it was average 3.3, which is one of the higher clutch sizes. They make 2 or 3 nest attempts each year. The nesting incubation is 16 days, and the fledgling or the nestling period is 16 days, so they fledge after 16. The male takes care of almost all the care of the fledglings immediately after they leave the nest. The female will feed them a few times that first few days, but she pretty well gives up and immediately starts building the next nest and laying the eggs. I had one female, the young fledged on one Saturday morning early, and by the following Saturday morning, she was incubating 4 eggs. So she had found a new nest site, built a nest, and laid 4 eggs, one each morning, and on the 4th morning was incubating the 4 eggs. That is pretty swift turnaround. Those of you who have bluebird boxes, you'll probably see the same thing. As soon as the bluebird young leave the nest, rip out the nest, and they'll probably come right back the next day and start building again. Not always, but often. This gives you some idea of some of the nest sites that were particularly favorable on these arroyo sides. That's my camper van that I used all the time. But these bushes, salt bushes on the sides of these arroyos were highly favored. Here's the typical arroyo. You see the bushes are fairly, you are seeing my cursor, I trust. Uh, the heavier bushes alongside the arroyos. This particular bush in this, Ronnie, you see my cursor?
Yep,
Just
we
seeing
can
your
see it.
cursor, Jay.
Okay. This particular shrub, for example, was used 7 times in 3 years. This could be 4 years, 4 years, 7 times in 4 years. 1 year, they only used it once. These birds do not reuse the same nest. They will never reuse the same nest. Now, when the nest is maybe 5 or 6 years old and the last 20 sticks are laying there, they might come back and build another nest on top of it. But that would be pretty unusual. Here's the bottom right picture of this set is another picture of these arroyos with the highly favored large salt bushes on their side. Over on the right side is this abandoned road grader that if you look behind the road grader itself, these bushes are very short. They're knee high at the highest. And so the birds really didn't have many opportunities for nesting in those very small bushes. This road grader had all kinds of nooks and crannies. And I think I counted 8 nests in there. And out of curiosity, just for experimental purposes, I removed one of these nests as soon as the young fledged, and just bingo, a couple days later, there was a new nest being built in it. So, no, when nest sites are a shortage, this just proves that they do depend on nest site availability. Notice 82%, the two high ones here, are in choyas and salt bushes. The other 18% are scattered in a whole variety of desert trees and shrubs. So, and I think the average height, I don't have a graph on that, I must admit, was less than 36 inches. Just under 36 inches was the average height of nest from literally on the ground up to, I think the highest nest was probably about 10 feet up in a Joshua tree. This just gives you a sense of the distribution of the nests. You see that here's this main arroyo going along the west side, and you can see all the nests that are right along. And some of these X's were actually multiple nests in the same bush. You just couldn't see here's that road grader again. Remember 8 nests or so in that. Here's another arroyo down along here along the road. Just to show you that the birds were favoring. Again, this nest could be from one of our local birds, a catbird or a cat cardinal, brown thrasher, mockingbird, except that you see a LeConte's thrasher sitting back there feeding its young. Here's where the other nest sites can be out in the desert. Choyas. I don't know about you. I'm not sure I'd want to be sticking my hand in that nest to pull out the young and weigh them every 2 or 3 days and see what their weight gain is. I don't think my hand would survive that very much. Okay. Nearly all the pairs remain mated for life. I had 54 pair bonds that I could verify. Only 2 of those were broken where both individuals survived and remated with other birds. So that's a pretty high, mated for life. And they don't migrate, as I mentioned. New pairs can form. I saw one pair form in less than a day in one case, from where it lost one mate to boom, next mate, same day. It could take a couple months. And except for their own mate or their fledglings, the adults don't associate with any other adult or any other thrashers. They're not flocking. These are not blackbirds. You don't see flocks of LeConte's thrashers flying across the desert. That would be interesting. But But the juveniles in their first summer, they have nothing else to do, typical juveniles. And so they form little bands of 3 to 5. One case I had 7 or 8, and they just roam around. They will pester the adults that they find and say, "Would you feed me?" They beg. They come up to them and actually open their mouth, "Feed me, feed me." And but otherwise, they're just typical teenagers at the mall, running around, not behaving entirely. Some other interesting facts about them: their nesting territories are very large. We're talking 10 acres at a minimum, and sometimes as much as 30 acres. I grew up much of my early life on a farm in Ohio, and a 15-acre field of soybeans or corn or whatever they were growing took an hour or more for me to walk around. And of course, I'd be bird watching or something. But at any rate, 15 acres, that's a lot of ground to cover. Um, Over the course of several years, one pair may actually occupy up to 75, not all at once, but over the course of, the aggregate is all 75 contiguous acres. The density out in the general distribution of the bird out in the Mojave Desert, Colorado Desert, Arizona, Eastern California, etc., is only around 2 or 15 birds per square mile. But at Maricopa, we had 30, which turned out to be the highest that I found anywhere in its range. Now, I did find a couple other places that were comparable that probably also had 30 birds per square mile, but I did not find any higher density. And again, these are non-migratory birds. They do not migrate anywhere. They stay put. Here's an aerial view of one of the territories. Actually, this is the home range, almost the entire home range of one pair for 4 years. It's only about 30 acres. You're only looking at actually about 25 acres there. A little bit on the left, lower left, is off the screen. I was up in a plane that one of the people took me up, and you can see the little dots there. Those are where the nests were located. Now, it may look clustered. That's because of the vegetation was clustered there. They didn't build their same nests in the same year in the same cluster. They usually moved, which I'll show you in a little bit. That's all the bigger area. This one pair moved in 4 years. Never saw them outside that red line. So what's the nearest neighbor? How close will they nest to each other? I have this really dense population, and so crowding and whatnot could be an issue. And looking at some 50 some odd nearest neighbor distances, it's almost 400 yards, almost a quarter mile. Well, that brings up then, what about their territoriality? How much do they actually defend, or will they defend at different times of the year? This is a screwy looking graph, but I'll try to explain it. Starting in January here, the birds will come from several hundred yards to your tape recorder and try to defend and kick you out of their territory, the intruder created by your audio. Then they nest around the end of January into February, and my cursor is just doesn't quite show up here. And they lay their first clutch, and then they immediately stop defending all but the immediate area around the nest. Now, by immediate area, we're talking like 30 to 30 yards max, and probably only 30 feet in some cases. It gets down to, you practically have to be playing the recording to get them to respond, to come out and look at you within like 10 or 20 feet of the nest. Then they, boom, that brood fledges, and then they start another nest. And for 5, 6 days, they'll be fairly responsive to your recordings, but then they immediately drop back down. And then at the end of the nesting season, let me get my cursor. My cursor doesn't seem to, there we go. It'll drop down at the end of June. If they had three nesting here, they'll be molting in this summertime and barely defending more than the area that they're feeding in at the moment. And then we get a cool spell at the end of September, early October, somewhere we get a cool spell. And then for maybe a day or so, the males will sing a little bit in the dawn or in the evening, but then they pretty much stop doing anything. But then it starts cooling off, we start getting a few rains, and eventually we get back to a high response to the recordings. So if you're looking for LeConte's thrashers, you definitely don't want to go out in the middle of summer. Besides it being hot, they're not going to respond. They might pop up in a bush if you're within a couple 100 feet, but that's as much as they're going to do. If you want them to come up to your car, you want to go from, say, Thanksgiving to the end of January. That's when you really want to be out there, dead of winter. By the dead, it's not really dead out in the desert. That's when most of the life is going on. So how far do they move from one nest to the next? And so I looked at 3 sets here. The same pair, same male and female, from nest A to nest B to nest C, D, E, over the course of time, whether it's same season or the next season. But then I also want to look at the males who lost their mate and the females that lost their mate to see if they changed any of their behavior. So we look at the same pair, and this is the distribution of how far they move from one nest to the next. Notice only the first few hundred yards here. Well, these are, unfortunately, it's from the monograph. Everything has to be meters. But you can see that the first 3 or 4 bars there, that's the bulk of the birds. Now we add just the males where they went after they lost the female. And you can see it's essentially a miniature version of the same pair distribution. Now let's add the females, the red little bars, and none of the females stayed in the same territory. They all moved somewhere. Some real close to themselves or close to their original pair territory, but many moved a couple kilometers off to the reservation, so to speak. And if you look at the measurements here, you see the first 2 are virtually identical, but the females losing their male mate were free to roam. They had no problem traversing any of these territories. They're theoretically out here beside them. The males, if the males had tried to move anywhere out, any distance from their territory, they were going to be competing and fighting with all the other males that are out here. I mean, in 2,000 yards or 2,000 meters, there would have been 5 other males just in one line, just in going in one direction. He would have had to traverse 5 territories. Give you an idea of the problem of a male leaving, even though he lost his mate. So he stays put and hopes a female comes to him. This is a nest we studied, and I want you to note the bird up on top there. That's a thrasher tell. It's the only time we saw thrashers sitting up in the top of a bush that were not singing. This bird would just show up at the top of the bush, either when the nest is being built or when the male is feeding the female on the nest, or when either the sex was feeding the young. They would sometimes, not all the time, exit out the top of the bush, look around for 10 or 20, 30 seconds, survey, I don't know what, like where they're going to go hunting next for their next grub, and fly off. But no audible note out of them. Now this little nest, I cut a hole, didn't cut it, I pushed aside the shrubs, the vegetation there, so I could see the nest. We had a microphone on this and we studied it for a complete day. I had a some friends sitting in their car, or actually on top of their car, on the exact opposite. In fact, you might almost see a little vis visually on the upper left corner there. And we were watching which bird was going where to feed, how many times the male came in, the female came in, what they were doing when they got to the nest, and that sort of thing. And I was on my side taking pictures and had a recorder going the whole time. So here's some of the data that we collected just in that one 24-hour period. And I highlighted the really salient point here, and that is the male was doing most of the lifting. He brought in 60% of the food and removed about 70% of the fecal sacs. I hope everybody knows what a fecal sac is. The young excrete their fecal material in a gluttonous, a mass, and the adults can do one of two things. They can either swallow it, which these birds do a lot, or carry it off and drop it somewhere else. Now, these thrashers do, I don't remember the exact percentage, it's about half they swallow because there's moisture in there. Why throw away water? But look what the male did as far as keeping them young. These were half-grown young. They were like 6 or 8 days old. So they didn't need really a heavy brooding. But the female did almost all the brooding. The male only did 30%. So he's out gathering the food, taking care of the fecal sacs, while she's doing most of the brooding. This is during the daytime. Well, this particular pair, we know the male left the nest at first light. That's one of the few times we were able to document which individual was leaving the nest, which otherwise spent the whole night on the nest. Only have like 2 other records, and it's very hazy as to who spends the night on the nest of these thrashers. Females incubate maybe, and then the male seems to, we don't know. Very interesting question. The birds can fly, not very high, as you can see here. No, they do get up a little bit, but not very high. So we were interested in their dispersal in their first year of life. How far do they go from where they fledge, literally from the nest that they hatch in, and where they build their first nest? So these are the young that are still being cared for by the adults, still dependent on their parents. And they only go, most of them are in the first 400 meters or so, and a few scattered on out a little further in that first 30 days of age. Actually, they're only 15 or 16 days of age, old at this point. Now I wanted to, they're starting to leave. There's still a couple there but from 30 days of age to the end of the nesting season, because it's a very long nesting season from the end of January to the middle of June. These young are fledging the end of February and then can roam around. That's when they're likely to beg when they bump into an adult somewhere else. They usually the adults ignore them most of the time. So you can see the young are now starting to move out. Then the summer, the top graph is the summer distribution, where they're no longer in the breeding season. The adults are not defending their territory, at least the males, and the females too. And so you get a nice bell curve here, nice normal distribution. And they're somewhat evenly scattered out a mile or a mile and a half, 2 kilometers. But then the end of September, early October, the males start getting a little frisky, and they don't like other thrashers in their territories. And so they say, get out of my territory. So these juveniles, these free-roaming juveniles suddenly discover, hey, we're not wanted here. And they are thrown out and start wandering anywhere they can find where they don't get thrown out of that particular spot. We're talking 10, 20 acres of territory. So it's hard for them to find a good spot. So they move quite quite a bit here till the end of the year. This is the distribution, how far they moved to the very first nest that they themselves built. So from their natal nest where they hatched, and you see a couple are fairly close to where they hatched. Now it may be that their parents are now adjacent, moved the other direction several hundred yards. So there's now room there for them. Now I want to take a look at how they actually moved around. Here's that central C that I was pointing out earlier in the middle. That's the x-axis central point for these graphs. So here's that X in the middle. This is and I want to point out before I get going here, these dotted lines just are only connecting the dots literally. They have no way of knowing where the birds were going between the dots. So this particular brood fledged at this location in May, May. And the first bird didn't find it again until the following February, and it was over in this area, a couple kilometers away, this direction. The second bird, and this is in the sequence they were banded, by the way. So this is the way it worked out. Same thing. We didn't see it again until the following February, January, March, and it was down in this valley. You remember the valleys are sort of running in this direction. There's another valley that runs to the south, and out in the town of Maricopa is up in this northeast quadrant of the graph. And number 3, of course, is the one that did all the graphing or all the neat data gathering here. It spent its first summer in this area right not far from where it hatched. And up until about September, it was over at this point. Then I didn't see it from September until the following February. And then it was nesting over here with a new mate. By the way, these others were all nesting birds that I found these. But then it lost its mate, and in late spring, it was here. And then I didn't see it again until the following October. And look where it is. It's right back to where it spent the previous summer. Now, whether it actually followed these lines, who knows? Who knows? Those were just, and they happened to be all 3 from one nest, and they all turned out to be females. Just here are 2 males, and I tracked with the color bands. They hatched here in April, and then in May, the first one was down here already. Just a month, they're already moved down here, and then not seen again until the following February. And of course, the second one is the one that shows all the nice graph lines. Seen down here just 2 months after fledging. It's already over here. Then we see it along here, and then we don't see it again until the following February. And actually, next year after that, even. But that was a male. Thrashers are members of the mimid family. They're known for their sound, their songs. This is the call note, the contact note that most birders will hear if they go out looking for this species. This is the chip note that we all recognize for a white-throated sparrow or something like, or the mockingbird in our backyard. The interval there was, as I noted in the footnote there, it was definitely foreshortened. There usually 10 or more seconds between them. Now we're going to look at a song. You heard that earlier bird singing. These little squares, this is a sonogram of a song, single song. These little square rectangles are called phrases, so you should think of them as words. And this is a conversation that somebody is giving a speech. And these are all various words, some of which will be repeated at various intervals throughout the call. So this is, each line is about 11 and a half seconds. So it's about 45 seconds of recording here, and you'll be able to follow along. And I want you to try and listen for the repeated call notes. Oh, how many of those little words were repeated? Ah, there's another question for you, round one. Let's take a closer look. Up at the top row, we have a blue triangle, a little one with gold trim, and another larger blue triangle. Those two notes are side by side, and the little one is first. Down here in the bottom row, we now see them, or the third row, excuse me, and they're reversed in order. So they're repeated, but they're together, associated with each other. This going back up to the top row, we have olive with red trim. This note is doubled right there. But down here on the bottom row, it's only single. Then I have my Christmas pair, red and green syllables. The green over here separated from the red by several little other phrases, words. But down here at the bottom, they're together, nothing in between them. But they are in the same order. So this might be, some noun with a bunch of adverbs or adjectives with another, who knows, and who knows what they're saying. I never was able to translate. What I was looking at for primarily in these sonograms was to see if there was some single note that said, I am a LeConte thrasher, comparing it to crystal thrasher and Bendyers and California and the other thrashers that occur out in the Southwest. Never found a thing. In fact, all the other thrashers that I played this to, or not this particular song, but played LeConte's through to, would respond to a LeConte. So I would get Bendyers, curved bills, California, crystal, come to a LeConte recording. So there were 72 phrases in that one recording. 22 were repeated. So 70%, 30% break between originals and duplicates. Using that and a lot of other recordings to come up with some other numbers, values, the minimum estimate for a single male is a few hundred pairs, phrases per male. The maximum number is limitless, might go forever. But in actuality, my best guesstimate is it's probably several thousand, maybe a little more, and they're still adding new phrases every day, if not every hour of every day when they're singing. They don't sing much in the summer and between nesting periods, egg laying. So big vocabulary. Compare that to Mockingbird has a pretty good vocabulary, very good one, in fact. I think their estimate is 3,000 or 4,000 syllables. But since this is a mimic, let's see what they do actually mimic. This is a list of just the mimicked animals, birds, and mammals that we found at Maricopa. I highlighted one there, the California scrub jay. We have no idea how a thrasher would learn a scrub jay call note, or because they're separated by at least 20 miles. The scrub jays never come down into the floor of the San Joaquin Valley, and these thrashers certainly don't go up into the mountains where the oak trees are that these jays depend upon. So who knows? You notice the one little mammal there, the antelope ground squirrel. Uh, those are the little tip notes that they make. They were whistling call notes, alarm notes. Now, just to give you an actual imitation, on the left is a real genuine California quail, and on the right is a thrasher. Not too bad, not too bad. I don't know if any California quails can come running to a thrasher, but never know. The males have some rather interesting display for a plain colored bird. They have some interesting displays. Here's one taken just right outside my, as you can see, the car window, sitting on a. We had some oil machinery and equipment left in the area, and he's sitting on top of one of the little valves. This is called a bow fluff. And the bird's beak is below its feet. The bird's body is fully fluffed, making it as wide, big as possible. The wings are slightly raised up a little bit, and the tail is flared. Not raised up particularly high, but a little bit. And it was singing. And here's the same sort of posture, but the bird's now walking slowly along the ground, still singing in this whisper song. It's very similar to the songs you have already heard, but you can only hear it from about 20, 30 feet away. Very quiet, called a whisper song. But again, fluffed up. Here's another display. I wish I could show you videos, but we didn't have video cameras in those days. This takes about 5 or 6 seconds, maybe 7 seconds, for the bird to just, and he's displaying to an intruder. He's slowly going down into the bush that he's been sitting in, looking at the intruder. And notice the next to the last, or even the third from the last view, he is showing the bird his rear end, the underside of his tail. I guess that's what that little buffy chrism of the LeConte's thrasher is so diagnostic and important for. Got to show your other competitors your buffy chrism. Thrashers do have other displays. Here's a thrasher displaying to a rattlesnake, but they do this for any snake. They hold the wings up. I think almost everybody has seen a mockingbird going across their lawn or anywhere, and flashing its wings up. But they're trying to get a insect to startle, to move a teeny bit so they can find the insect. These thrashers never do that. They don't have any wing markings, so it wouldn't really do any use to them. But when they come across a snake, that's the only time I saw this behavior, they would hold the wing up for a second or two and sort of freeze for half a moment and give you this posture. Here's a whole group of various postures that I pulled off of various slides and movies. Now in the second row, this is the same bird. He first raises his wings a little bit, holds that for a second or two. Then he moves to a 3/4 up, holds that for a couple seconds. And then he goes to full Monty and has the wings completely raised for another couple seconds. But these are all displays or postures of a bird looking at a snake. Now we want to take a look at their feeding and food preferences. We've got to remember that they don't drink. So 95% of their diet is animal material, but only 5 or 10% is plant. And again, rarely drink or even see water. Now going back up to look at the animal material, it's mostly small arthropods, but they will eat small reptiles and other bird eggs, including their own species. One one of the biggest losses of eggs, of thrasher eggs at Maricopa was to other thrashers. Other thrashers would come in and raid their nest or at least poke holes in the eggs and destroy the nest in that manner. But the thrashers would also take any other bird. I'm sure if they found a baby mouse or something that had crawled out of its burrow before it was due to get out, it would have consumed that as well. But baby mice, kangaroo rats, things of that sort don't normally leave their burrow. But I did see them take a small lizard. And fruit, very few fruit out in this part of this habitat. There are a few cacti fruit, but I never found any evidence I looked at hundreds of specimens in the museums, and I could not find any with stains. If you see a mockingbird in the middle of the summer, many times it will have some sort of stain around its forehead there where it's been eating something. And again, rarely sees. Out on the dunes, the birds are really have it made. Virtually every animal except the birds burrow into the sand dunes at dawn, even in the wintertime. This is even in the winter. They have the same habit. They burrow in and leave a little a little pile of sand. It's only a little bit bigger than a quarter, where they burrowed in. Well, thrashers are pretty quick learners, and they say, "Oh, look, there's a tell." Oh, when they just haul it, they dig it out. The bottom of the screen is probably 15, 18 inches from that hole. So you can see how far they were tossing the sand. There's a close-up of the hole. Sorry you can't quite see it. We should have used our flash. But that's more than a quarter in diameter and probably 2.5, well, maybe not quite 3 inches deep. And this is one of the things that they are finding. These are what we call around here, at least in my basement, cave crickets. Very common animal in the desert too. They're called sand treaders out there. And those things weigh a couple of grams. To give you an example, a male ruby-throated hummingbird weighs about 2.8 grams, I believe. So these are a little bit lighter than a hummingbird, and they're 90% water. So now we know where they get their water, their prey. Here's a graph of some stomach contents that I analyzed. These are ant size, smaller than 13 milligrams. These are tiny ants, aphids, that's our size range. And they only got a little bit of biomass out of this. They had to eat a lot of them. This is like you or me eating raisins one at a time. We eat one raisin, 2 raisins, 5 raisins, 20 raisins. And then we go over here to the other extreme and we only eat a few big bugs, and we get a lot of biomass out of the cave crickets, grasshoppers, spiders, once in a while a lizard, things of that sort. So there's some puzzles we have. Who does the bulk of the incubating and brooding on the nests? I'm still really questioning who does that. We did not have telemetry in those days. It was very expensive and almost not for that size bird, and it just wasn't possible. So we have no idea who was on the nest in 99% of the cases, who was on the nest. And does it vary with the stage, incubation versus brooding? My impression is the male does a lot of the later brooding, and then takes care of the young immediately after female goes to building. What is the benefit of that super fluffy second inner lining of the nest? No other species out in the desert, regardless of size, has that except hummingbirds, which are all down, so they're all fluffy. But anything that has a stick nest does not have the second inner lining. So why do LeConte thrashers? And another question I ended up with was, do the birds in Mexico nest a lot earlier? Some of the specimens in the museums were of young birds, and I could tell by their size of their plumage, their bill and wing measurements and things that sort, that they were 8 or 10 weeks old. I could age them fairly closely, but they were collected in like January. Well, they're just starting to nest in the United States in January. There shouldn't be any 2-month-old young floating around. So they may be nesting as early as Thanksgiving, maybe, in Mexico, Sonora and Baja. To summarize, up until 1967, only 14 of these thrashers had ever been banded. And this study, we banded 353. And since the study, perhaps a maximum of 150 over the ensuing 50 years have been banded. We learned an awful lot about their movements, pair bonds, and various social and individual behaviors and interactions. Overall density was determined to be low for most of their range, with a few high spots here and there, very localized, like Maricopa. And they are predator specialists, just like a woodpecker, except instead of digging into wood on a vertical surface, they're digging into a horizontal surface for the same insect, grubs, things of that nature. Most of their food, at least for the nestlings, was grubs, mealworm, literally mealworms. Actually, Tenebrio, the genus of mealworms, was one of the common food elements for the nestlings. And it still remains a fairly hard to study and elusive species. A friend of mine sent me this picture while she was out studying the thrashers, and she came back to her ATV. 2 thrashers. I'll let you read the caption. Here's the monograph, published 2018, 50 years and 6 months almost to the day from when I discovered I had a big population of thrashers. I get nothing out of that. For those of you who don't know scientific publications, you publish that stuff, you get nothing. Nothing. Monetarily. I'm not sure I got much else either. Okay, this is not quite the end. While that monograph was in press, literally being worked on, I made a stop out at Maricopa in the spring of 2018. But I couldn't quite get to all the original study area because some of the roads were washed out and some ranchers had put up new fencing and I couldn't get through. So I could only get to about 60% of the original area. I expected to find maybe 20 or 30 old nests. Nests are very easy to find. They survive 3 years at a minimum and sometimes 4 years out in the desert. There's just not too many storms to destroy them. And I expected to see a dozen or 2 thrashers themselves. I found 0 thrashers anywhere in the study area. None. I did find 2 old nests and a possible 3rd nest that was possibly of that same spring of 2018. So not a lot of birds evidence. Here's what it looked like, if you remember, in 1970. Here's what the same area looked like when I visited in 2018. Cows decimating the shrubs. So, to make a long story short, don't go to Maricopa to study LeConte's thrashers unless they reduce the grazing and we get a little bit more rain. They've been in a big drought out there too. I won't let you read all this, but a couple hundred people really helped on this whole monograph and this whole study. It wasn't just me. I had lots and lots of help. Unfortunately, after 50 years, quite a few of those folks have passed away, but to all of them, I'm very, very thankful. And this is my Mr. Goodyear Vulcan rubber slide. How lucky I could get. I just blundered into this very high density population, had no idea. The access was superb. I had all these roads, and even the ground was very good. I could just drive almost anywhere. The salt bushes were present. No cholla. I didn't have to stick my hand in a cholla and lose a couple pints of blood every weekend. This is in the corner of the valley. Now, that may not seem important, but to the west was the mountain ridges that you saw in those couple of those pictures, and to the south was another mountain range. And so the thrashers ran out of salt bushes, any vegetation other than grass, rather quickly if they went to the south or to the west of this immediate study area. So they could only really go to the north, and the northeast was right where the little town of Maricopa was. So, and we had few predators. In 4 years of working out there, probably 1,500 man hours roughly, I saw like 5 snakes, maybe 6. And most of those are rattlesnakes. And they don't climb up into into the shrubs to devour nestlings and eggs. I mean, they certainly would try to take a fledgling if fledgling came up to it. And then I just lucked out. I bought a camper van about 3 or 4 months before I even came back to the Maricopa to catch that first pair. I had banded a year earlier. And so I had a place to stay. And I would spend all my nights out right in the middle of the study area, listening to coyotes and kit foxes, occasional owl. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. That was amazing. And you can unshare, and we'll come back and do Q&A. Let me get a spotlight on you.
Uh-oh.
All right, I got a spotlight. That was amazing. And you said that you didn't get anything out of the study. Well, we sure did, and society did. We got that knowledge, which is priceless. So we appreciate all of the work that you put in that, and that you were persistent. 50 years, got it done.
Yeah, I wish I could have afforded to just live out there for 50 years, but I had other commitments.
Yeah. Well,
had to earn a living.
We'll open it up for Q&A. If you want to ask Jay a question, you can raise your hand. I'll call on you. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to go back over here for a second. Megan asked, do you know what the average territory site size is for just songbirds in general?
Oh,
is
yes.
there a general?
Yes, my apologies. I was going to mention that. Mockingbirds in the east here probably have the largest of the common birds that we see that I've been mentioning tonight. They're probably in the order of an acre. Catbirds and cardinals are a half an acre. Song sparrows, quarter of an acre. House wrens, an eighth of an acre. They're really tiny. So that gives you robins maybe an acre at the most. It depends again on the quality of the habitat and what they're sure how many lawns for the robin to, for the mockingbird to walk across and flash its wings, you know. So that gives you a rough idea.
Thank you. And then in the chat box also earlier on, we have Douglas asked about the no apparent sexual dimorphism and any ideas how the thrashers tell females from males. And the females that lose their mate seem to wander freely through many territories, whereas males are driven out.
It seems to be totally behavior, but I and Doug and anybody else out there, we cannot see ultraviolet. So I don't know if any of the mimids should have an ultraviolet reflectance off their plumage, which, believe it or not, jays do have. I think all the jays I've seen evidence for. And so they can see at some distance, oh, that one has a bright, shiny head reflecting UV. But I don't know. But everything's behavior. They seem to know each other and behavior. Raising the bill and fanning the tail instantly tells somebody else I'm a male or a female. I never quite solved that, but they're pretty instantaneous recognition.
All right, Denise, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hey Jay, I actually have two questions for you. One is, are there any hybrids with other thrasher species?
Far as we can tell, there's like one hybrid in the whole genus between two species, and that was a brown thrasher and a curved-bill, I
Hmm.
believe, down in Louisiana or something. Otherwise, this genus is very, very conservative, and
Hmm.
in fact, I do not know of any thrasher in the genus sharing its nesting territory with any other species, not just its own conspecific species, but Bendyers and LeConte's will not nest in the same territory, in other words. And there are a couple places where we have Chrysal, California, and LeConte's all within a couple hundred yards of each other. There are not very many places like that, but there are a few. And again, they all have their own little territories. We've had male California thrashers singing right next to male LeConte thrashers. By right next to it, I mean 400 yards apart. Again, 400 yards seems to be the sort of minimum. Does that
Yeah,
answer number one?
it sure does. The other question, when you started out and noted that they like the very flat landscape, it made me think about, the massive solar development in Mojave and how is it affecting the species? I can tell by your expression, it's terrible, huh? They're not coexisting well.
Yeah, I was just on a Zoom call this afternoon, believe it or not, with a working group on thrashers. And although it didn't come up in this particular call, particularly 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure exactly when, the Bureau of Land Management, bureaucrats in Washington or
Hmm.
someplace designated certain sections of the Mojave and other desert areas out there for solar development. They
Hmm.
didn't ask any biologists which part of the desert was good or bad. I think they were picking it on which ones were next to existing power lines, and that was their only criteria. So if you look at the background behind me on this Zoom call, that's mostly creosote bush. There are actually some places out there where it's 95% creosote, and the thrashers, practically no birds nest or use creosote. It's a pretty barren landscape when you find square miles and square miles. If they had asked us, I would have said you could take all these creosote flats and just put solar panels anywhere and clean off the creosote and go for it. But yes, so some of the areas, and that's why this working group is set up. We've got these uh, surveying tech protocols so that the power companies can then find out if they've got thrashers on it. And I would probably imagine the half or three quarters of the areas that they want to put solar panels have LeConte thrashers. Maybe not very many, but at least some.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, Moral, you have your hand up.
Yeah,
Hi,
Brian,
Jay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Who's this?
Yep.
This is Miral.
Oh, okay.
Hi. So I joined late and I was wondering if you spoke about how did you get into this particular bird when you started the talk?
In 1967, I stopped there while I was still on active duty, banded a pair of thrashers, came back almost a year later. I was no longer on active duty. I was just starting graduate school there in California. And I had about a week, couple days where classes hadn't started. And I said, oh, let me go up since I have nothing else to do. I'll go up to Maricopa, 2 hours away, and see if I could find any thrashers. I didn't even know I was going to find the same ones. In fact, I walked to the same spot, and here are the same thrashers, or at least looked like it, with same bands. And that's got me to looking around. The next thing I know, there are pairs of thrashers all over the place. And I realized I'd just sort of hit the honey hole for LeConte thrashers. And for many decades, that was the place. If you looked in your bird finding guides in California, Maricopa was the place to go. There's still a couple places nearby, but the study area I was in was the place to go to find LeConte thrashers. And so
And this,
it's just
yeah,
totally fortuitous that I only happened to go back that, if I'd waited another couple months while I'd already started, I already had other projects in mind. They were closer to the campus. I didn't have to drive 2 hours each way.
that's awesome. So my other question is that what is the furthest east you have seen them?
Furthest east?
East Coast, the U.S. East Coast.
Oh, well, they don't get any further east than Phoenix right now. In fact, not even in Phoenix. You've got to go west of Phoenix and south of Phoenix to find them. They don't get out of southwestern Arizona. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right, Preston, what you got for us tonight? What question?
I want to know how many different pairs of birds, individual pairs of birds, do you think you've ever seen around there?
Well, I had most, not all, the adults banded with color bands, so I knew each bird individually. I knew this one from that one, and the most I could come up with was about 54 pairs where I knew that if one of them left, I knew that one had left. And so
there's more than 100 birds
individual,
in that.
well, that was over 4 years. That was over 4 years. At any given time, I had about 35 pairs in that track that was outlined on the map there. And then I had a few more pairs. The boundary that you saw the map, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that was just to figure out the density, how many pairs per square mile, per acre, per 100 hectare, etc. I had. That was the only purpose of that line. I was still looking elsewhere around the perimeter beyond that line for nests because I was concerned that birds would leave my area and go outside, or vice versa. Birds from outside, when they got older, when they left the nest as babies, would move into my area. And I wanted to know where they were coming from or going to. In fact, I hope I don't want to take too much more time, but the 2 winters I had a weekend where I got 25 really top-notch bird watchers out there and 2 to a party. And I gave them maps and recordings, and they looked 3 miles beyond my study area for any banded thrasher. To give you an idea how many thrashers they found each weekend, the number was 250 thrashers
Wow.
in one weekend. I don't
Different
know.
ones.
I don't know if anybody's even found 250 brown thrashers anywhere in one weekend. So that's a lot of thrashers of any kind. But that's how thorough
that's a lot.
we were in looking. And out of that 250, only 3 or so each of those 2 surveys were banded birds that I did not know existed. In other words, they had been banded in my study somewhere and had moved somewhere. I'm sorry, had been moved out, and I didn't know where they had moved to, and so they discovered 3 each of the 2 surveys. But that's a lot of man hours and covered, another 8 or 10 square miles.
Wow.
Oh, thank you. Now,
Thanks for that
Alan
question.
earlier hypothesized, could the LeConte's thrasher learn the call of the jay from a mockingbird?
That quite possible. Actually, during one of those surveys, we were having lunch right in the downtown Maricopa. There was a little hamburger stand, and we said, and we've been listening to these recordings all day, so we, imbued with their sound, and we thought, oh, there's a LeConte thrasher singing right here. Oh, wait, it's up on a phone line. Well, they don't get up above 8 or 10 feet. That's about as high as they normally go. And we looked over and we thought we were going to see a mockingbird. No, it was a starling mimicking a mockingbird who was mimicking a LeConte's thrasher. Now but I could see the reverse where a starling or maybe a mockingbird, they don't move a lot, brought in the sound of a scrub jay. So good question. Who knows? They didn't tell me.
Mary asked when you showed the picture of the male bird going into the bush and doing the threatening or getting the intruder out, do you think that they would do that in the cholla?
They go through those cholla like it was a fun place to dive into, like it was just another bush to drop. And I never found any bird with a thorn in its foot or wing or anywhere. They slide through those thorns like water. Amazing. Does that answer your question, I hope?
It does. Thanks very much.
Anytime.
Alan says, oh, just one second, Fred.
Okay.
The slide that says that there's no more than 30 per square mile, does that mean that most of the babies disperse?
That was adults. We're talking, forgetting the young when they momentarily, for a moment there, sure, there might be 60 in a square mile when the young are all popping out of the nest. But after the dust settles in the fall, in the middle of the winter, when everything is pretty stable. I mean, it's always moving. There's nothing's truly stable. Then that's 30 per square mile. So the best time the other good time to look for, I should have mentioned, yes, the other good time to look for the thrashers would be in the middle of spring. That's when I did that survey, the visit back in April, because I expected to see a lot of juveniles hopping around looking for food and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do with their life. And saw nothing, saw none. But that normally, if you were in a good thrasher habitat, you should expect to see at least juveniles in April. I don't know if any of you know what the breeding bird survey is.
Yeah.
Where you go out and stop every half mile and listen for 3 minutes, blah, blah. Well, they're done in May or actually in June. Well, out in the desert here, June, everything stopped breeding. They're they're nothing but young birds and quiet adults are out there at that time. So thrasher survey have to be done in the middle of the winter, December and January, maybe February.
All right, Preston, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I went to Arizona a couple months ago for a week, and those cacti, they drop these like spiky balls, and my mom told me, look down at your feet, and I noticed that there were a bunch of cacti balls all over my feet, and we got them off with a stick. And since they have those tiny like ridges, it hurt to get them out. It was like a sting. They were like stingray barbs. It really hurt to get them off of my feet.
I wish I could show you the scars on my hands and my toes where I've been nailed by too many cactus thorns. They are really nasty. Yes, I totally agree with you. Oh,
Those ones
those are
are
jumping cholla. That's what they call them, jumping cholla, because you barely touch the little segment that you saw the picture of behind that lady's house and some other pictures I had, and they'll just fall
Drop
right off.
off.
Yeah, drop
Yeah.
right off.
they the when those serrated edges break off, there's poison in it, so the
Yep.
poison goes into you when you try to break them off. That
My
was my worst time in Arizona.
Yep. I'm sorry you bumped into them. Welcome to the Desert Club.
Sean wants to know, how did you catch the birds?
Oh, the adults, I think all of them were caught with mist nets. I would either have a net up and play the tape, or I knew where the nest was, and I could put a net on one side of the nest, and I could stand on the other side and so forth. That brings up the first pair, that very first pair from '67. Their very last nest together when I found it was in a shrub about chest high. The nest was about waist high. I could stand touching the nest and the pair, and I'm standing out in the open. There's no other bushes around. The pair would come and go and come and go and come and go, feeding their young. I guess they finally, after 4 years, got used to me. Thank
right,
goodness it wasn't a
Al.
cholla.
What you got, Al?
You mean Alan?
Alan, sorry.
That's all right. So
I'm
first,
calling you
Jake.
Alan tonight. I don't know.
Yeah, that's just I don't know any. My Uncle Al. Thank you so much, Jay. Very interesting, fascinating, and this is sort of building on Manal's question earlier, but to sort of go back a little further with just how you got interested in, this kind of exploration. Like, you can go back as far, to when you were a child that you want to, but just, can you remember when this, sort of became something where, well, this is something I'm interested in, and yeah.
Well,
thanks.
yeah. I started when I was about 3. My grandmother would take me fishing, and you don't get bites every 5 minutes. So what do you do while you're sitting there waiting for the fish to bite? You look at the birds that are hopping around in the Baltimore Orioles and the yellow throats and the mockingbirds or whatever. And so I got a very early taste of birds, and I started banding birds by age 14 or 15. I was helping band birds. Got my own permit when I was 16, and I was banding birds left and right all through this study period. Obviously, all the thrashers were banded. So,
Thank you.
really, yeah.
Thanks very much, Jay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you everybody for joining us. So, and thank you to Jay's grandmother for taking him out fishing so he could learn about birds and all of that. And we'll see you next week we're going from the desert to the seaweed, to under the sea. So hope to see you back for Must Learn Thursday. In the meantime, stay well, stay curious, stay warm out there, and stay safe. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Nice job, Jay.
Thank you, everybody.